Hi, I'm Cara Wallis, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at Texas A&M University. And there I teach classes in new media, communication and technology, and on media, culture, and society in contemporary China. The name of the book is Technomobility in China, Young Migrant Women and Mobile Phones. One of the things that got me interested in my project was a trip I took in 2002 when I hadn't been in China for a few years, and I went back, and suddenly everywhere I went, I noticed people talking on cell phones. And I was like, wow, even some of my friends at home in LA are not using cell phones. In China, for most young rural people, young adults, after they finish middle school or maybe a little bit of high school, a lot of them, I would say the majority of them, migrate to urban areas, to cities and towns. And when I was in Beijing, the young women that I was doing my research among had come from all sorts of provinces around China. And at the time, so I started my fieldwork in 2006, and I did 10 months of fieldwork. And at that time, for those young women coming to the city, and this is still true, was really not just to earn money, but to, they would say, see the world, which meant Beijing, develop themselves, which meant learn some skills, and obviously have some, autonomy from their families at home. And they would come to the city. At that time, when they came to the city, none of them had cell phones. And it became this huge thing. For all of them, it was their first big urban purchase. And they would save for about 6 months of working, and then they would spend about a month's salary on their cell phone, if you can imagine that. And so it was this big thing in terms of their identity in the city, becoming urban, part of modernity as it's constructed in China. I will say that part has changed somewhat now. A lot of young people can get cell phones in rural areas because of the diffusion of the technology and the lower costs. But at the time, it was this very significant item in terms of their urban identity. But beyond that, the way they used it for social networking was incredibly important. A lot of the young women that I knew felt very isolated in the city because rural to urban migrants in general are quite marginalized and often discriminated against. But these young women also felt like, for some of them, they didn't really have a good friend in the city. They had colleagues, but not a friend, and they always distinguished that. So this gave them this incredible means of keeping in touch with their friends who were, working in other parts of China or still at home if the friend, had a landline or cell phone. And as one woman said to me, before when you went out to work, no one knew where you went. But now, it's so convenient, you can keep in touch. And there was a negative aspect because they now have a cell phone with the number that is their personal number. It's given some employers a way to harass them, to use the cell phone for surveillance. And as an example of that, one young woman that I met was going through this very difficult situation where her boss would call her or text her at night right as she was getting home after an hour bus ride, because migrants often live, pretty far outside the center of the city, accusing her of stealing things. You stole these new blouses from the boutique. And the woman was so upset, she said, no, I didn't, and I'll come back and show you where they are. I'll prove it to you. And, she's relating to this story to me that, one night she's outside, the buses have stopped running. She's about to flag a cab for a ride back. And, migrant workers never take taxis because they're way too expensive. But again, she's so upset and she's so traumatized. She feels like she needs to go and show her innocence. And then, right as she's about to hail a taxi, her employer calls her and says, oh yeah, I found them. Yeah, they were where you said they were. So that obviously adds this, very negative dimension of this means of surveillance, this very micro surveillance. We usually think of surveillance like, Big Brother, but in this very sort of, interpersonal one-on-one way that was kind of disturbing to see. Another interesting aspect of their cell phone use was camera phone use. And for many of these young women, in fact, for all of them, the cell phone camera was the first camera they'd ever owned. So their first, personal imaging device. And they used it in very interesting ways. Some of them used it as an archive of friends and family like we might expect, but also taking pictures of some very personal images, like a tree in their hometown or the one flower outside their basement dormitory. And they would, use these images to look at them and remind them of beauty or remind them of home, to kind of use them as a resource against Beijing, which, could be a very alienating place and very, tall buildings and traffic and, concrete jungle, I guess we could say. But another dimension was to sort of work on themselves. And a lot of prior research among young rural to urban migrant women has also found that, over time they change their appearance. They, as one woman told me, she wanted to shed her rural essence. And that meant dressing differently, doing their hair differently, sometimes wearing makeup. And so women would document this in their phone. And, some of them, it was quite interesting. I mean, one woman had like 100 pictures of herself that she showed me and asked me, how do you like that one? How do you like that one? And it was this very sort of interesting experience of, looking at the way that she was constructing herself in these images, really in contrast to how she felt that she looked when she first arrived in the city. If we think culturally, rural to urban migrants, although the government has made a lot of policies to try to improve their lives in the city in recent years, but still they face a very difficult situation in the city. And these young women, because of their gender, their social class status, their rural background, and their young age, they're called dagongmei, working little sisters, were very marginalized in the city. And I think one of the very interesting things when we think about the connection between technology and culture, or what I like to say the mutually constitutive nature of technology and culture, is although they were mobile, coming to the city, migrants, coming from rural areas, in the city they were often very immobile in terms of occupying a very small social space, going from work to home, working very long hours. Some of them never had a day off except for Chinese New Year. Others had only 1 or 2 days off a month. And so the way that I characterize their usage of the cell phone is what I'm calling immobile mobility. So they have this physical mobility moving to the city, but in the city they're relatively immobile in terms of their social space and their geographic sphere where they're moving in. But the cell phone allows them this access to have this virtual mobility, to connect with friends, to participate in certain urban consumer practices, to, like I said earlier, work on themselves. These types of usages of the technology also speak to important social change happening in China at the level of the everyday, almost the mundane. But I don't say mundane meaning not important, but the kind of things that are easy to overlook if we don't focus on these sorts of daily practices.